I graduated from the Air Force Academy, so I was kind of programmed, I guess, to be in the military, obviously. I always wanted to fly, so that was my motivating factor. And once I graduated, I went to pilot training, which is what we're doing here, having our pilot training reunion. And then, of course, being young at the time, I wanted to be where the action was, so Vietnam was our place of choice. And that brought me there. Well, they were very supportive. I'm sure worried at times, but they were very supportive of what I wanted to do. My dad was in World War II. He was a Marine, and so he was Guadalcanal, in that area. And he eventually got malaria, so he came back a little early. But anyway, yeah, my dad was in the military. It wasn't a career. He just was in during World War II and got out right after. Out of pilot training, I went to the O2, Skymaster, as a FAC. And I spent 1 year doing that, and then I volunteered for a second tour, and that's when I got in the F-4. Yeah, the F-4 base was out of Ubon, Thailand. And I was in the 25th TAC Fighter Squadron and 8th TAC Fighter Wing, which was Robin Olds made famous. Our mission, by the time I got there, was air-to-ground. So very seldom, we carry air-to-air missiles, but we didn't seldom use them because that mission went up to Udorn, and they became the air-to-air primary wing. So air-to-ground is basically just go up and drop bombs. You know, we learned how to do that, and it became more, as we did it more and more in theater, you got better and better at it, but it wasn't something that you had to have a lot of training. Basically, we had to learn the area, and we flew as a wingman for quite a while, and then you fly as a flight lead. We did a lot of that, Ho Chi Minh Trail, and especially when I was fast-facking, using the F-4 as a forward air control aircraft, but that was our primary mission, was to run the Ho Chi Minh Trail and take targets coming down. There were always plenty of targets. AAA was our major threat in our air-to-ground mission and then the fast-fac mission. Small arms, about 1,500 feet, you know, AK-47s and some of the machine guns, they weren't much of a threat to us, but the bigger guns, 37s, 57s, 85s even, they were lethal. And the 37 is what I think brought us down. And they were fairly rapid fire, and they carried a wallop. And that's what there was around the SAM site, which we were up trying to find. That's what they were using to protect the SAM site. We found both. His name was Tadzu Sinicki, good Polish boy, and he was fairly new, and in fact, that was the first time that we had flown together that day. So he probably thinks I was unlucky for him. But we keep in touch. We're good friends, and once he came back home, he got a chance to go back through pilot training. He busted out of pilot training before for air sickness, and became a navigator. But once he came back from being a POW, they gave him another opportunity to go back to pilot training, which he did, and he went on to fly this airplane behind us, the 111. No, we were together almost the whole time. Initially, when we were brought into the POW camp, we were separated for a little while, but it took us 19 days to get where we were shot down near the DMZ to Hanoi, and so we were together, of course, that whole time eventually. And when we got to Hanoi, the Hilton there, we were separated for a little while, but eventually got back together. So we were together almost the whole time. Well, it became painfully obvious after a while, but we got hit in the back end of the airplane, and it was a distinct feeling. You know, you could feel the hit, and it severed, obviously, our hydraulic lines. So I had no control of the airplane. In fact, the stick was violently moving in the front. I couldn't even hold on to it. So we became nothing but just a bullet. I want to say missile, a bullet flying through the air. And I couldn't, I was real close to the coast, so if I could have turned right, I could have gotten feet wet and probably bailed out over the water. Or I could have gone left, maybe, and got out over the jungle area. But the area that we were in, the coastal area, is pretty wide open and very sparsely populated with trees, in other words, places to hide. So I looked to my left, I looked to my right, and all I could see was fire. And what had happened, we were going, that was one of our tactics of survival, was to go fast. So I was going 550 knots plus probably. And if we'd have jumped out right at the airspeed, it'd probably broken every bone in my body and maybe not even survived. But fortunately, by virtue of getting hit, probably exploding and catching on fire, it slowed us down tremendously. So we probably got out about 350. But when I looked left and right and I saw the fire and I had no control of the airplane, it was time to go. So you have a system in the airplane with two people that if one goes, the other one goes. And so I could pull the handle and eject the backseater. He had a handle in the back that he could rotate and do the same thing. Otherwise, it would just be him. If he didn't rotate that handle, it would just be him that went out. But we usually flew with the handle rotated. So if either one of us pulled the handle, we would eject. And as long as you made each other where it was going to go on. But it was obvious to him too that we were going to get out. And that's what we had to do. It was kind of interesting since it took us 19 days to get up to the north. Is we spent a lot of time in villages on the way up, and most of the time it was a curiosity factor to start with. The people would come out, and we were in a truck headed north, and if we were spent the night, then the guards we'd be taken to some little hut and put in there. But most of the time we'd pass through a village, and one of the most interesting things, or not interesting, I guess one of the weirdest things, is the political officer who was traveling with us would get out and harangue the village, just work them into a frenzy. And literally, we'd be running out of town in the back of that truck with, the dust behind us and the people chasing us with these sticks. They carried their stuff on these, I call them chogi sticks, and machetes. And I mean, if they'd ever caught us, I'm not sure we'd have survived that. But that was kind of harrowing, and we did that numerous times. And in one village, we stayed a couple of weeks, and it became more of a curiosity factor. The kids were curious, of course, and the old men were probably more curious than others. In other words, and sometimes they'd come up and offer you a cigarette, and they couldn't talk our language or anything, but you could tell they were very curious and kind of friendly. The women were the ones who were hardcore. They hated us. But the kids and the old men, they were kind of funny. But we spent a week there, and a couple of times they'd take us down. We were pretty close to a river. And so we went down to this river, and we'd get freshwater clams. They have digs for freshwater clams. And they actually put some of them in our rice for us. But some interesting experiences and a couple of harrowing experiences. One of my friends, he was actually shot in the foot before he was captured. And, depending on who picks you up, it could be pretty interesting. I was picked up and captured by, I think, Vietnamese regulars, North Vietnamese regulars. But, if you got picked up by some of the locals, it might be a little bit different situation. Fortunately, if you had to pick a time to be shot down, I guess my time was the best. At the end, for those of us who are new guys, there less than a year about time frame, the torture stopped. Never got the torture. I mean, the treatment wasn't great and the conditions weren't great. Worst thing that happened to me was I got some cigarette burns on my hand because I wasn't answering questions properly on the way up to Hanoi. But once I got there, you got interrogated pretty intensely, and it was pretty. You resisted, and then they throw you into a big cell, and I never saw another interrogation after that. So I was very fortunate. There were only 2 instances of the new guys that I know of that were tortured, and that was for a short period of time. But the old guys had brutal torture. It was really bad. But I knew about the TAP code. but I didn't know about the hand signal. It was kind of like a deaf and dumb way to converse, and it was much quicker than the tap code. And so if you had visual contact, it was much easier to communicate that way. And so that was our primary means of communicating. Once we got in big rooms, of course, you could talk to each other. And then we had certain guys that were better at this hand stuff. I mean, they could make their hands move like a jet fighter moving around. It was just incredible. And so they, through another building out across the camp, they could communicate very quickly, and we get information that way of what to do and what the rules are. And that was important because once we got into the Hanoi, the main area of the Camp Unity in the Hanoi Hilton there, we had access to the guys who'd been there for years. And so they had rules and regulations run like a Air Force wing. And so we had squadrons and flight commanders, and a lot of information came down from above that was helpful and brought us along into the group, I guess, to make us good POWs. The peace accords, the Paris Peace Accords, one of the provisions in there was that they were supposed to read the protocols to us, which they did. So we started getting separated by shoot-down dates and moved into different parts of the camp, and eventually we ended up over at the zoo, which was another camp, and released from there. But they read those protocols to us about how we'd be released, and not necessarily when, but it was coming, and you could tell the treatment got a lot better, and the food got a lot better, and we actually knew we were going home. We thought pretty certain of it. The only bad thing that happened to me or our group was we were supposed to be released on the 27th of March. And so they got us all dressed up in our go-home clothes that they'd issued us, and getting ready to get on the buses to go out to Geelong. And they said, "Get back off the bus, back into your rooms." And so we didn't know what had happened. And so that was kind of disappointing, a little bit big letdown that day. We eventually went out the next day. And apparently what happened is they'd had a mix-up or a problem down south with a release down in South Vietnam. And so until that was taken care of, we weren't going anywhere either. So that was a little bit of a disconcerting thing at the time, but only cost us a day. They had numerous C-141s coming in to take us out each day as it progressed over a couple of months of the early release or first releases to our release, which was, I was the next last release, and I think the next release was the next day or a couple of days later. So we could actually see the 141s from our camp coming in. So that's what you just knew you were going home, but you didn't know when. But and I was telling Jane, I think it was, that we at one of our reunions a few years ago, they had the Hanoi taxi, one of them, here, and they were getting ready to retire it and move it into the museum. And so at our reunion, they took us all up and kind of recreated our getting on the 141 and flying out. And so we went up, got in the 141, flew around the pattern, and then came back out. And then they had the simulated welcoming and all that kind of stuff. So that was the last time I flew in the 141. But we knew, by virtue of the job we were doing, that was always perhaps a consequence of our job. We could get shot down, could get captured, could get killed. So we accepted that. To me, serving my country was one of the highest honors I could ever hope to have, and I feel proud of being able to do that, and then to conduct myself in a proper manner in camp. Some people didn't, but most of us did, and we were able to return with honor, and that was always important to us. And as far as what I think our kids need to know is that service to your country is an honorable thing, and it's not something you should shy away from. We should all serve in a way that we can. It doesn't have to be necessarily be in the military, but and I think one of the things I took away is that yes, it seems like sometimes it was a waste. We spent so many years and so many lives in Vietnam, but we did stall the progression of communism throughout that area. I think our role may have seemed like it was a loss at the time, and especially with the feelings back home during the anti-war movement and what have you, but those of us who went fought with a cause, and we believed in it. And I think that the people that have fought in now Iraq and Afghanistan and that long war that we've had now over there will probably tell you the same thing, that it may seem like a waste, but they have served a purpose, and there was a reason, and they did their job admirably, and I think they should be proud of that. And the other thing is that you need to understand that your country will never forget you. And I found that to be true, is that, they don't just bring you home and forget about you. There's services, there's the VA, there's all sorts of different things that you can, if you need it, it's there. So be proud of your country, be ready to serve, and don't be ashamed of that, I don't think. Sometimes I felt a little guilty because you mentioned your welcome home and how people are welcome today, and I think that's one of the consequences of Vietnam, is that finally people realize the sacrifices of their military, because when I came home as a POW, our welcoming home was tremendous. But the guys who came home otherwise, the grunts who spent a year or however long they came home to baby killers, threats, and warmonger, and it was terrible the way we treated our military. And it's much better today. And I think that probably a little bit of the consequence of what those guys suffered and went through during Vietnam. Hopefully that never happens again. Well, it's friendships that you'll have forever and have had. I mean, this is our 50th reunion, but this is our first reunion for this group. So it's just like getting back and reliving your initial time together. And so nothing much changes. They're your buddies, and buddies forever. So it's a good feeling. You get to tell a few war stories and a few lies and relive some times, and so it's always fun, I think.
And what's this particular group?
It's our pilot training class. It's 7001 at Moody Air Force Base. So we were, I don't know how many people we had in our class. Remember how many we had, Earl? 53 people, graduate, yeah. So we have a pretty good turnout here, and we've lost a few over the years, obviously, but it's good. It's good to get back together.